Well, it's Thanksgiving week, and I'm reminded that it was my direct ancestor, name was John, who came over from England in 1634, just 14 years after the Mayflower, after the original Pilgrims. And he came over for much the same reason. So I was reminded by that, and I did my research, and I decided, you know what I'm going to do this week? We're going to talk about the true story of Thanksgiving. So let's get going. My name is Jonathan, and I'm a caregiver for my wife Lynn, who has a permanent brain injury. Things are different now, but we're doing the best that we can. Join us as we experience the Lynn life. The truth about the first Thanksgiving isn't exactly correct as we were taught when we were kids in school. The image of pacifist settlers singing Kumbaya with the natives isn't exactly correct. The truth starts in August of 1620 in England, when 120 men, women, and children set sail on 2 English merchant ships in Southampton Harbor, bound for the Americas. Neither vessel was well suited for the journey. The first ship, the Speedwell, was so old it had fought against the Spanish Armada in 1588, and the Mayflower was an ungainly transport ship that could barely set sail into a headwind, and that was exactly what it would have to do. It was the worst ship to attempt a crossing with. But they were determined people, the Pilgrims. They were separatists, choosing to separate themselves from the Church of England because they believed it was beyond redemption due to the Roman Catholic past and the Church's resistance to reform. This forced them to start praying in private. By 1620, the community determined to cross the Atlantic for America, which they considered a new promised land where they would establish Plymouth Colony. It would be an English colony, but one not bound by religious politics. So they set out in August of 1620, but they weren't out of the port yet when the Speedwell began taking on water. They shored up the leaking boat and set out again, only to head back and leave the Speedwell behind and continue with just the Mayflower. So 102 people crammed onto the already overloaded Mayflower. They finally headed out again in mid-September. Halfway across, they ran into a bad storm, and a main beam cracked, and they had to head back to England again. After repairing the beam, they started out again. They sighted land on the 9th of November, just off Cape Cod, and they ended up dropping anchor in the natural harbor of Provincetown. Before disembarking the Mayflower, the Pilgrims wrote and signed the Mayflower Compact, an agreement that established a rudimentary government in which each member would contribute to the safety and welfare of the planned settlement. Scurvy and illness took over the ship, and the cold winter months soon turned the ship into an icy tomb. They found themselves strangers in an unknown land, and everywhere they went, eyes were watching. They camped on the shores, suffering repeated attacks from the natives. Eventually they found a suitable building place that they were looking for, and they began construction. By February, the settlement was complete, but without adequate food and proper shelter, the Pilgrims began to die off. By the time spring arrived, only 47 of the original 102 were still alive. The spring also brought their first face-to-face contact with the locals. A tall, dark-skinned man walked directly into their settlement, and then he greeted them in English, welcoming them and asking for a beer to drink. He was Samoset of the Eastern Abenaki. He spent years trading with English fishermen, but his English was very broken and hard to understand. So the next week he returned with another man, known as Squanto. He spoke fluent English. He had been taken by slavers as a boy and lived in Spain and England, and then he escaped back home again. With Squanto's help, the Pilgrims were able to develop a peace with the Wampanoag. The Pilgrims agreed to help them against their enemies in return for mutual protection and much-needed agricultural advice from Squanto. And so began an unlikely friendship. By the following fall, things were looking much better for the Pilgrims. In celebration, the men were sent into the forest to shoot some game birds for a feast to give thanks to the Lord for their bounty and good luck. They were joined by 90 of the Wampanoag, who brought 5 deer for the feast. And there you have the first Thanksgiving dinner. They celebrated for 3 days. So that's the story of the first Thanksgiving, as told by me. Now, Lynn, did you know that the Pilgrims drank beer?
No.
You didn't know they drank beer? They did. They drank beer like it was water. Because in passage, water might become rancid, so they were allotted about approximately a gallon of beer a day.
They got it.
Yeah, in fact, they landed in Plymouth Rock because they were running out of beer. Interesting, huh?
Wow, they were a bunch of drunkards.
Okay. But they didn't look at it that way. They looked at it like as a way of hydrating. So we got to look right in that camera, and we got to put a close on. This is Thanksgiving, so we wish all of you happy Thanksgiving. And we'll see you next time on the Lynn Life.